Church History. Light Amid the Darkness as Seen in the Life of Luther. London, G. Morrish, 20, Paternoster Square, before 1915. Republished by Irving Risch, host of Down to Earth but Heavenly Minded podcast. Chapter 11. Luther and Miltitz, AD 1518. Luther on his journey home saw a copy of the brief of the Pope to the Cardinal in which he saw that he was already judged by Rome and condemned, and that the Cardinal had orders, unless Luther recanted, to seize and carry him to Rome. He was naturally filled with indignation, and he saw at once the great danger he had run. It was indeed God who had protected him. The Cardinal next wrote to the Elector, giving his version of the conference, and requesting the Elector to send Luther to Rome, or at least to banish him from his dominions. The Elector sent this letter on to Luther. It filled him with the utmost indignation. He was to be condemned without being proved to be wrong. To know this was necessary for Luther, and was blessed of God. He had fondly hoped that when errors had been pointed out, the rulers of the Church would have rejected them. He had yet to learn that they deliberately chose error and rejected the truth. Luther had learnt a good portion of truth, he had yet to learn what the Church of Rome was. This he was learning by degrees. This letter before him was to this end. He saw that at all cost he was to be condemned, right or wrong, to save the Church. This stirred up his spirit and revived his courage. He wrote to the Elector, begging him not to send him to Rome. To banishment he would go if the Elector wished it. The Elector wrote to the Cardinal, and told him plainly that it was unreasonable to expect Luther would retract until he had been shown to be wrong. He also declined to send him to Rome or to banish him from his dominions. Luther proceeded to draw up a report of the conference, that all might judge how matters stood. He felt sure that things could not rest as they were. A storm would surely be raised, and it might burst on him at any moment, so he set his house in order, ready to depart into banishment at any time if that was his path. But he was full of courage. Having tucked up my gown and girded up my loins, said he, I am ready. God is everywhere. His thoughts turned to France. A storm was brewing, and Luther was given to understand from the Elector that he had better leave Wittenberg. He prepared to go, but previously he called around him all his friends to a farewell repast. They met, and were enjoying each other's friendship, when a letter was brought in haste to Luther. It was from the court, asking why he was so long in going. All were filled with dismay. They could speak but little, they sat and wept. Still he felt his path was now to leave, but whither could he go? Commend my soul to Christ, said Luther to his friends. While still lost in deep concern and thoughtfulness, another letter was brought. He need not go. There was a new envoy from the Pope, and he hoped all could be arranged. Luther now published the report of the conference at Augsburg. The Elector had sent to ask him not to issue it, but the request came too late. Luther summed it up thus: what an amazing crime to seek after light and truth. This was judged to be a crime in those days, for the Catholic Church would best flourish in error and darkness. Luther saw clearly that nothing was to be gained from the Pope, and instead of the matter being soon settled, he foresaw that the battle between truth and error had not more than begun, so, though he still styled the Pope God's vicar on earth, he formally appealed from the decision of the Pope to a general council of the Church. This was on November 28, 1518. The matter must no longer remain a question between Luther and the Pope, but the whole Catholic Church must have the truth presented to it, and choose either that or error. The Pope, however, would not quietly let the settling of the question slip out of his own hands, so he dispatched a new representative to Germany, who was to try and bring Luther to terms. Or he was to bring him to Rome. For this latter purpose he was furnished with 70 bulls. See note, to post up in the various towns he passed through, so as to overcome all and prevent any from taking Luther's part. This new legate was Miltitz, chamberlain to the Pope, and canon of Mayence. Being a Saxon by birth, great hopes were placed in him to bring the matter to a satisfactory conclusion. How little they understood that between truth and error, between light and darkness, there could be no agreement and no fellowship. Note. Bull is from the Italian bolla, a bubble, blister, seal, or stamp, or from the French bulla, Latin bulla, a boss and ornament on the neck. This name was given to the seal appended to the edicts or briefs of the Pope, and in process of time was applied to the brief itself. End of note. Miltitz laid his plans discreetly. He heard such complaints against Tetzel that he summoned him into his presence, but the poor fellow, who had for some time been obliged to give up his traffic in indulgences, was afraid to come. Though he made as an excuse that he was afraid of the adherents of Luther. Miltitz hastened to have an interview with Luther, and by soft speeches they were enabled to draw up a paper, agreeing to 1. Both sides were to be silent on the subjects in dispute. 2. A bishop was to investigate the matter, to point out the errors to Luther, who promised to retract them, and never more do anything to lessen the honor or authority of the Holy Roman Church. As we said before, Luther had received a large measure of truth, but he had yet to learn what that church was to which he was attached. This he had not yet learned, or he never would have signed any such paper as that. As yet he was the servant of Rome. Miltitz was delighted at his success. He invited Luther to a repast, where he appeared very friendly, and he kissed Luther at parting. Luther feared lest it might be a Judas kiss. After all, there was no real progress made in the matter. A bishop was to convince Luther, and if so, Luther was to retract. The battle had not yet been fought, it was only postponed. Miltitz then proceeded to Leipzig, where he summoned Tetzel before him, and severely rebuked him, declaring that he had been the cause of all the evil. Thus the poor wretch who had served the church so zealously was now condemned. It was also proved that he had robbed the church of large sums of money, and in thorough disgrace he died in misery shortly afterwards. Just about this time the Emperor Maximilian died, and the Elector of Saxony took the management of affairs until a new emperor could be appointed. This turned the current of events. The Pope must now be friendly to the Elector, in the hope that he would oppose the election of the King of Naples as emperor. And for the time being Luther must be let alone, rather than give offense to the Elector. Luther now began to study the decretals of the popes. See note. This was of value to him, because these decretals gave him great insight into the sayings and doings of the popes. He was surprised, grieved, and confounded at what he read, and at length was obliged to ask himself if the Pope were not Antichrist or at least his apostle. Note. This is a collection of the decrees of the various popes. It forms a part of the canon law of the Romish Church. End of note. Miltitz discovered that he had not really obtained any victory over Luther, and he therefore laid a plan to decoy him into the states of the Archbishop of Treves under the pretense of the archbishops investigating his cause. Here he would be away from the control of the Elector Frederick, and could be dealt with as they thought proper. Luther wisely declined to go, giving various reasons without positively refusing. Just at this juncture Miltitz and de Vio repaired to Frederick, and announced to him that the Golden Rose, see note, had arrived, a present from the Pope to himself, which they hoped would be a favorable time to influence Frederick against Luther. But Frederick had now supreme power, and cared but little for the Pope or his nuncios. The Archbishop too had reasons for not offending Frederick, and therefore he did not press his request, and so they agreed to let the matter rest until the next diet. Note. The Golden Rose was deemed to represent the body of Jesus Christ. One was consecrated each year by the Pope, and was given to one of the leading princes or rulers of the countries attached to the Roman Catholic religion. It was considered a great favor to receive one. End of note. While they waited for the diet, the truth was rapidly spreading. Luther's writings were printed and reprinted and sold by thousands over England, Germany, France, Switzerland, Italy and Spain. At this time there were but very few Bibles and Testaments, and people knew but little of their contents except what was read in the churches, and what was told them by the priests. Those were indeed days of darkness and error, and in every place where the writings of Luther came they were hailed with delight. Though not faultless in many respects, yet they contained a great deal of truth, and especially that truth, that great truth, that sinful man was to be justified by faith, simple faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, and not by works and penances.